So thanks everybody for coming. My name is Christine Harada. I was formerly the Chief Sustainability Officer of the federal government under the Obama administration. And since moving back to LA, I am now with a partner with Ridge Lane, which is a investment advisory focused on triple bottom line projects. So the topic was inspired, just to give it a little bit of context, if that's okay with you, then I'll introduce the speakers and ask them to share a little bit about themselves for a few minutes, then we'll launch into questions. And again, because we're such a small, intimate audience, please feel free anytime. So historically speaking, clean air has been in the realm of regulations, and for 40 years, that made great sense, right, from a public goods, a role of government perspective, and certainly as well as the state of technologies available at the time. And over this past summer, I had the great opportunity to work with Xprize to develop a prize, if you will, for clean air, for addressing air population. And we focus largely on the outdoor air quality environment. But I think that there's now a good convergence of technology, of social mores, and of business models that really make us ripe for dramatic acceleration of ability to make an impact in the state, if not also revolution outright in the space. And so, as I mentioned earlier, organizations like Xprize are exploring opportunities in this space, and businesses that can provide clean air solutions for individuals is on the rise. We've got two good companies here with us today. Awareness is also dramatically increasing thanks to developments in data science in this field, and because we all walk around with our own computer, much like the Jetsons world, it's raising a dramatic awareness, not just for the issue, but then also our ability to be able to take action on that as well. It's raising a lot of great questions for public discourse around land use, and we're also better able to engage with a bunch of other stakeholders. So I'd like to quickly introduce our speakers. Dean Flores, starting with my immediate right. Dean Flores is a proven leader in the air quality arena. He's served as the past chairman of the California Senate Select Committee on Air Quality. And while he was in the Senate, he authored a series of groundbreaking anti-pollution laws that are focused on San Joaquin Valley's dirty air, and he repealed the agricultural industry's historic exemption from air operating permits that had lasted for 63 years. And as somebody who grew up in LA in the 70s and 80s, and I remember what it was like, thank you for the work that you did. He served in the California Assembly from 1998 to 2002, and in the Senate from 2002 to 2010. Representing Central Valley, including Bakersfield, Fresno, and 18 other cities. He's now president and CEO of Balanced Public Relations, which specializes in education and technology. He's a former investment banker. He received his MBA from Harvard, or Harvard, as we MIT people like to say. He earned his Bachelor's of Arts degree in political science from UCLA, go Bruins, where he also served as student body president. So Aslak, over on the end, he is a chief revenue officer for Nava, which is a company that makes the smart green wall, and that helps to dramatically improve air quality indoors as well as tenant productivity. And they're really beautiful. Check him out on their website. He oversees the global sales and marketing of the company, and Nava has offices based in Helsinki, Stockholm, and New Jersey. And certainly last but not least, Nancy Barba is a program manager with Frontier Energy. Frontier is a product of 5 companies that came together to leverage their strengths, relationships, and data to help reduce energy use, increase alternative transportation, and bring new ideas to life, all the things that we're talking about at this conference. They're fuel agnostic, and they work on projects involving electricity, hydrogen, biogas, conventional fuels, etc. So let me turn it over now to the panelists to say a few short words, and then we'll freely jump into questions thereafter. So Dean?
I feel like I should just get all the chairs and we should sit around each other, but nonetheless, thank you. Just a few items. Obviously, the California Air Resources Board had a pretty big year. Well, we've had a couple of good years, but this year was particularly interesting as the governor renewed our cap and trade program and extended it. But in that was an important bill that I think was pretty monumental for our board, which was AB 617 by Cristina Garcia. It is really kind of the pollution side of the equation. It's kind of the co-benefit part that it was always missing in some sense from the original cap and trade bill that was passed here in California. But in that, it's the first look from the California Air Resources Board at what we call air monitoring. It's that thing that sometimes goes somewhat overlooked, particularly at the local air districts level, although they have been the leader. We have this vision with $200 million to start that we can kickstart a view of air monitoring, much like most of you would pull your phone out and hit Waze or one of your various ways to go home, and you have a real complete picture of what the freeway system looks like, where there's bottlenecks, roadblocks, you have alternative patterns to get home. My view of what we need to do with air monitoring in California is to have a similar view, live, real time, with what the air is like in California from a network perspective. So in other words, we should all be able to pick up our phones, and at some point, some ingenious company that would want to win an Xprize would figure out how to tell us all what the air quality looks like live, real time, and at any point in the state. So if I'm going to drive to my hometown of Shafter, California, I should not only know what the air is like, but I should also have some idea of what it's been like for the week. And it shouldn't be reliant on red flags or yellow flags outside of schools, sometimes very late in the day, trying to get folks to understand what it's like. And the reason that's important from my perspective is true change, particularly government change, comes when citizens have a very transparent view of what the situation really is like with good data. So I was really excited to be part of this panel because I'm very interested in what the federal government did with this Xprize, very interested in trying to get some of our folks out there engaged in the conversation about big data, engaged in the conversation about network solutions, and trying to figure out what we do with all these air districts that are, in some cases, handing out backpacks as monitors, in some other cases, putting them out in areas where we now call, what we might call remote areas that bottom line, needs a lot of work, needs to be networked at some point. So at some point during this conversation, hopefully we'll continue that, but I don't want to give my entire thing now. Thank you, Christine.
Right, turning it over to Nancy.
So I want to start with a question. By a show of hands, how many of you have worked in commercial food service? So that could be a cafeteria or restaurant. Okay, I'm seeing about 40% of the hands. So commercial food service in the restaurant industry employs, in 2015, 14 million people. That means about 1 in 10 working Americans work in our commercial foods kitchen. There's 620,000 restaurants in the United States. So you're probably asking yourself, what is a connection to clean air? Well, to really understand that connection, you need to think about these commercial food service kitchens as mini factories. So these kitchens are very energy use intensive. Per square foot, they could be 10 times the amount of energy used in retail space, and more than 10 times the emissions. So with many underperforming ventilation systems, that means the risk of indoor air quality problems really skyrockets in the commercial food service industry. So Frontier Energy, that's the organization I work with, we work on air quality issues with several organizations and utilities, and we develop baselines and test the efficiency and efficacy of these new emerging technologies that can be integrated in commercial food kitchens. So when you consider that most kitchen workers are low income, it's pretty sad and disgraceful that we put these people in these harsh working conditions. So we have the resources, we just need to get this information out to OEMs, original equipment manufacturers, distributors, and consumers to really make the best options possible.
Great, and Aslak?
Yeah, hi all. Before I start, I want to do a little exercise with you guys. I've done this in several countries that I'm been a speaker at, and let's see how the US and the California and LA works with this. So I'll be challenging you. I'll give you 3 options. 1, you do 50 push-ups with me at the same time. 2, if you don't want to do push-ups, you can do squats. There's plenty of room. I checked that before coming here. 3rd is that you just move and come to the front and clap for the ones that are actually doing the exercise. So why do we do that? Come on, guys. So 50 push-ups, 50 squats, or you use that time to cheer others and come to the front so you can hear the panel better.
5-0.
Yes.
I don't know that I'm capable of doing 5-0 push-ups.
So you can also choose whatever you want. Okay, come I'm not joking.
I might be able to do 15 on a good day.
I'm not even gonna look. I'm gonna feel bad. Okay.
Wow. 5-0. That's crazy. That's amazing. Wow.
So you are in good shape, right? The purpose of the exercise is to show also what the air quality does for us. If you have a poor air quality, we have no energy, we can't concentrate, there's no, like cognitive skills go down, and we spend about 22 hours per day indoors. So you can then think, if the indoor air quality is poor, so what kind of effect will that have on us? A bit, sorry. But that's fine. That's what Nava is all about. Like when we started the business, the main reason was that if you think of the indoor air quality, and in schools, for instance, especially, so the school kids can either concentrate or they can't. If you can help them to concentrate better, how much effect will that have? But then if you look at from the business side, a lot of companies need a lot of people to be focusing on something. If they do mistakes, that's going to be costly. So that is what Nava is all about. So we are trying to bring, we say, like quoting like forest air machine. If you have the best air quality in the world inside, that's easier to do than do it for outside. So the pollution and everything that we have outside compared to the smaller rooms that we have inside, so we start with the smaller pieces. And then if we get to breathe those kind of forest air quality, you can talk about Amazon forest or the Nordic forest, and with that kind of air quality, the health, the productivity, everything rises up. So that's where we are at, and we are talking about bringing the nature back indoors, like where we used to live, like 10,000 years ago. We used to be all the time outside, now we are inside, so what can we do there? Yeah.
That's great. I'm still candidly in shock about having witnessed 50 push-ups. You know, that's just like crazy. Okay. Oh my.
So yeah, that's new record. Good.
So maybe we'll start with you as you continue to catch your breath. I will speak slowly, but let's start maybe with like overseas to the U.S. and then back to the state, if you will. But so with respect to Nava, I think it's a beautiful product, and there's some examples like that of other green walls here within the United States, like the LA Clean Tech Incubator is an example. And it looks like your client base is largely still in Scandinavia and Europe. Can you tell us about some of the lessons learned from your experiences overseas that you think are certainly very portable, relevant for us here, beyond just the indoor air quality, enhancement of tenant productivity, et cetera?
Sure, thanks. A good question in a way, like in the Nordics when it's cold, so you need to build the houses, the buildings, they're really tight, which then causes the problem that the air that you have inside isn't also, it's unorganic, it's not coming from outside, you want to build it inside, which makes it dry, and then everything that's inside stays there. And what we notice in then people getting a lot of asthmas, allergies and all that things happening, in a way that when the air quality is getting different from the quality that we would have in the nature, that causes us symptoms that will occur. Also then if you consider like the changes in the climate indoors as well, when it gets here it's all the time perfect. I love the weather in LA, no complaints about it, but if you go to Finland, so it might change from -40 to plus maybe to in Fahrenheit to 80 or something, so that the changes are drastic, and many times those changes are also indoors. So basically what we've been seeing then, that if you keep the air quality is stable, the humidity level, the temperature and all that, so people actually don't get sick, they don't get flus, they concentrate better and so on. So those kind of things are happening, and what we see, we have about maybe a dozen clients here in the US at the moment, but we have a lot of global companies that are actually trying to become a global customers for us. So what we see there is that the productivity levels go up, and the employees are happier when they actually feel better at work, and we see there a huge opportunity for this market as well.
That's great. One of the things you may or may not know about me, I'm a recovering aerospace engineer, and I'm reminded a little bit about what NASA does with respect to air quality or monitoring for air quality on both the space station, the space shuttle, et cetera, as well, and the kind of experiments that they did in the 60s with respect to what plants help clean up the air the most while being still resilient in space. And thankfully, since I have a very brown thumb, those are the plants that I have in my house. And can you tell us a little bit about maybe how might these technology and that capability be applied to an outdoor air quality kind of environment? Is that like just too super far-fetched, or how should we be thinking differently about that?
That's a good question. The way we build it up is to be as close as humans as possible, like saying that 22 hours per day we are indoors, so that's where we started from. Outdoors, in a way, the same kind of a technology idea can be used. The thing, how the plants actually purify the air is in their roots. So the leaves don't do it, even though if you have a big forest like Amazon, so of course there are so many leaves and roots inside, so even if the air doesn't flow properly to the roots, they still clean a lot of air. But that's the problem with if you think of outdoors, so how we should make the system. Basically, but also like bigger cities, you have been building like kind of vacuums, those avenues and alleys, they actually, the wind blows all the time to the same direction, and that will make it possible actually to clean it. So the way we do it indoors is actually increase the airflow so that everything that you have in the air goes through the device and the Nava green wall itself, and that is the most important, that the roots need to get the air, and you would need to do the same thing for outdoors as well. There are a lot of possibilities, and I think the bigger cities, I don't know if that was on purpose or no, but actually like kind of the wind blows all the time to the same direction, so that would help in that case. But you would need kind of being controlling where the air goes after that as well, and that would help the humans to breathe. But it's a big challenge, and I'd say that's more costly than to fix the indoor ones.
And Nancy, turning over to you, turning domestically, can you tell us a little bit more about your efforts here in the United States? Like, you rattle off some pretty big numbers. I had no idea that commercial food service was that large, that it employed that large of a number of people here within the United States. And can you tell us a little bit about maybe some of the newer areas about how the market can address air quality? So, for example, I don't think many people would have thought of commercial food service as an area or an opportunity of target.
Yeah, so I think that is one of the big barriers to really improving indoor air quality in the commercial food service space. And I come at this kind of conversation from an energy efficiency background. So one of the challenges is that a lot of the work being done that kind of impacts these appliances and equipment, it's really done by utilities through energy efficiency programs. So it's incentivizing the most efficient equipment. Now, one interesting fact about that is that in residential or commercial setting, we have something known as Energy Star, and many of us know what that means. Well, in commercial food kitchen equipment, there is no such thing as Energy Star. So there's not a lot of resources that tell you what saves energy and what's better for air. So what is good ventilation design? What is kind of a very good broiler, let's say, that may reduce emissions? So some of the progress being done is that we see a lot of collaboration between utilities and South Coast Air Quality Management District and the California Air Resource Board in really funding studies that really provide and collect that data so that we know how to improve this type of equipment. Because the only way we're going to make change, and we've seen this in energy efficiency over the last few decades, is you have to collect the data, analyze data, then make sure that OEMs really produce the equipment that is going to meet the goals. So there's some early, NOx emission testing being done in our Food Service Technology Center in San Ramon that is collecting that data. Okay, how much, because we don't even know at a baseline some of these emissions in these kitchens. So we need to know the baseline. We need to know what the goals are. Another interesting factoid is that there is no indoor air quality regulation for restaurants or for that specific industry. Now, many of us don't think of it as particularly toxic environment, but when you think that it actually creates a lot of that very small particulate matter that lodges in your lungs and it has known health risk, not saying that we necessarily need regulation, but we need something to kind of make people understand that it should be a priority. There's a lot of opportunity there for improving indoor air quality.
Sounds like it's some fairly dramatically low-hanging fruit where we can, actually have a lot of real impact.
Yes, and I think one of the major challenges, another major challenge, is that it's not an industry with high profit margins, as we all know. So there's not a whole lot of flexibility with revenue to necessarily go and invest in the best equipment. And without the information, people may not know what that equipment may be.
So with that, for both Aslak and Nancy, since we have the opportunity with a regulator in the room, what kinds of public policies, would you want to see? And I hope it's okay, this is just like public comment throwing at you, Dee, just as ideas. It's being filmed, it's transparent, it's public, et cetera. But love your guys' thoughts on, these are both things that I don't think many of us who've been doing sustainability and climate change and things like that, I think we very much focus on the built environment and buildings and cars and all that good stuff. But the indoor air quality regulation standards for a commercial food service kitchen or other places and other spaces like that is certainly not something that I've really thought about. So I'd be interested to hear you guys' thoughts.
Go ahead, Nancy, if you have. Sure. Well, okay. Well, coming from Scandinavia again, saying that drinking the water, for instance, this is clean water. I have no problem in drinking that, and the same applies with food. So you have all these kind of regulations for that. We eat 1 kilo of food every day, drink 2 kilos of water, but breathe 15 kilos of air. So again, the regulations there are not considering what will happen to us if there are no regulations. I know the problem with censoring and measuring the data, that what is a good air quality, that is the problem there. And what we like to talk about is that the nature knows what is a good quality of air. Nature has been producing that for us, and of course we humans and engineers, we need to build up some kind of that to be able to measure that what is wrong, maybe. Starting from particles, VOCs and stuff like that, we know that are harmful for us, so we would like to see that happening, that you start regulating some, saying that this is wrong, these are the measures that you can say that I like the star rating, for instance, kind of ideas that you could prove it, that what's the level of indoor air quality in this particular building, and kind of having that. We have all these kind of certifications proving that we do everything green, which is great, but do we do also for humans? I don't know what the color for that would be. Do you have any idea? Or anything else that we would understand it the same way. This is good for humans. So those kind of regulations will then drive businesses toward that direction and build up new businesses, and I think that would be good.
Nancy, thoughts?
So I think that thought on regulations, and one of the big opportunities is we've seen it in kind of clean fuel vehicles where you create competition but kind of instituting regulation. So we've also seen it in furnaces, where soon the South Coast Air Quality Management District is going to only allow a certain type of furnace that produces, less than 14 NOx per joule to be sold in this district. So similarly, I think we can see that in commercial food service, where if we lower the standard by which these types of appliances could be sold, and really increase knowledge. So a lot of it is just people don't have the information or the knowledge that this can impact their restaurants, and making that, so if only the best possible equipment or better equipment could be sold, right? People would have less options. And they would also then hopefully have access to better education to understand, okay, so perhaps this ventilation system that will really reduce the emissions inside the restaurant for workers will benefit their health and benefit in some way their bottom line. Because many times these are demand controlled ventilation systems, so they use less energy than having them on all the time, but people don't know that that is the right thing to install in any restaurant. And I want to kind of share a little anecdote. So one of the projects that our team worked on was a kind of a LEED Platinum building. And one of the things that was left out of really the design early on was the commercial kitchen that was going to be inside in the restaurant, in the lobby. So they were going to do charcoal-broiled, all of broilers and all of this kind of emission-producing things, but they left that out at the beginning. So when you do that, and we don't think of those facilities at the very beginning, you don't design for them. So we had to go in there and kind of do some remediation on ventilation and things like that. So it's really thinking about that commercial food service element in new buildings at the very beginning.
Interesting. So Dean, turning over to you, certainly we're very grateful again for ARB's leadership through the decades. And when I was working at the White House, we certainly did look to California for a lot of the policy, both policy ideas, lessons learned, how do we help implement them across our nation, which is incredibly diverse, diversity of problems, as well as solutions. Love your thoughts on how else can ARB help markets innovate, and together collaboratively help us to clean up our air.
Well, I find that the conversation on the food kitchen interesting because we are trying to figure out what to do with compost, as you know, and try to figure out what we're doing with the methane issue. So even on that back end, I think it's very valuable for us to look at that. So I definitely want to have some conversations with you and some of our staff on this. That would be good. I think to the question of what ARB is doing to help innovate, I don't know how to back into this question. Let me start by what other countries do. So in two different systems to think about. So let's start with China. So China has something that the United States doesn't. It has scale, has lots of people. And they, we're kind of small compared to China, right? We're like this small Vermont-ish, place in the world. And yet we have a lot of ingenuity and technology here, but has really been basically developed, I would call, kind of on an open scale, right? In some sense, we share a lot in many cases. Well, I'm going to not talk about Silicon Valley for a minute, but the rest of us somewhat share. And I think for the ARB, the way I think we should and continue to think about what we do is that we regulate up to certain standards. Those standards are set in broad picture by the legislature and the governor. And then we try to figure out what that middle ground is. And in trying to find the middle ground, I think sometimes innovation gets very stifled, meaning we look to the status quo in order to make a decision, and our models are based on the status quo, and very little happens on the innovative side. China, on the other hand, having been there with Governor Brown and really did a deeper dive with some of their staff, they have a completely different top-down model that I think is some areas they pick industries that are closed. In other words, we're going to work on this problem in a way. We're not going to necessarily share this until we have this completely figured out. There's no openness to the system, and they pick certain industries to do that in. Let's use autonomous cars. So how China is dealing with autonomous cars is completely different than how the U.S. is dealing with autonomous cars. Right now, we're waiting for 2 bills to go through. The feds, one on autonomous trucks, one on cars, one's stalled, one's not supposed to be talked about due to union issues, and that is, in some sense, a very big part of our mobile source issue in the nation and in California, which is large trucks, right? So at some point, it doesn't matter how good of a truck Elon Musk builds, if it's going to be an autonomous truck and it's going to have some capacities to take large amounts to the port and back in a clean way, that innovation is somewhat stifled due to the fact that we have, a very open way to talk about that. In China, that is probably the opposite. They will figure it out, they will implement, it will be a captured industry, and then they will kind of move forward on it, and very little discussion in terms of all of the parties coming together. Which system is better in the long term? To be debated. China has something we don't. They can scale that, and private industry can come in after and really scale it with so many people. In the United States, we can't really scale it in any sort of real way. From a worldwide perspective, we can scale it in California and in the nation, but it's very difficult to do it the other way. So from an ARB perspective, I think we choose the model of openness and transparency. In that, we have a lot of interest groups that come in. We debate rules. I'll use electric buses as an example, and CNG, and what should be the input for the next 20 to 30 years, who would innovate in that area. And if you're a private company, I just gave a little talk a minute ago and got deluged with CNG folks that read an article I wrote in the LA Times said you're absolutely wrong, and there's got to be a slower way and more methodical way to build to electrification. And in that, I think we stifle some innovation and some companies that could come in and really make that big leap by knowing that we have to kind of slowly iterate into that next process. ARB's job is to pick winners and losers, but I do think what we do on, let's say, electric buses will be a good indication on how people will innovate or not innovate in this realm. How China does electric buses, it's going to be completely different, and they will probably have more electric buses on the road than we will in a lot faster time. And they can do that because they'll be able to scale it with more people. We won't. So it's a long way to say, to answer this question, that I think ARB is still trying to figure out whether or not we're stifling innovation or whether we're actually creating it. I mean, we have these great standards, but I would not say that most of the innovations in the air monitoring world, in the carbon capture world, in the food waste and methane world, if you look at California, we set great standards, but we don't create the technologies, truly. Those are in Israel, those are in China, and in some cases in India, and now with Trump's 30% tariff on solar, you can just kind of roll that out as well in terms of, in some sense, kind of guiding and pushing that to the next level, which is solar plus storage. A lot of countries innovate quickly, fast, and I think we kind of lack that due to the fact that we've got a lot of interest groups to talk to, and there is a good part of that process, and we, you know, environmental groups, environmental justice groups should be a part of this discussion, but in some cases, when everybody else is invited to the table, it does slow things down somewhat tremendously. So I think what the ARB should do is pick some industries where we're going to really, truly dig deep and go with a standard and kind of move forward. Not to say that debate is not a good thing. I was in the legislature, but also I was in the legislature. So, so I can tell you that legislature makes 80% of its bills the last week. The big bills are done in the last 2 days. The really, really big bills weren't bills till the last day that you never thought would come up, and then you had this big breakthrough. And the only reason that happens is because people finally get in a room with a deadline and have to solve something. And you know, for 2 years prior to that, I don't know what we did in the legislature other than kind of talk about things we should do. But the big things get solved because, in some sense, it became a very closed discussion with very little input, believe it or not, other than the people that you represented, and someone made a decision. So, long story short, we've got to kind of figure out that iteration.
So I've got one last comment, and then we'll open it up to the floor for questions, if that's okay. So I found your comments about China just super interesting, and I understand with their outsider looking at it, I haven't been there in a long time, but you know, it's a tremendous contrast in transparency.
Yeah.
You know, versus here in the United States, we, at least in the Obama administration, we sought to free all the data, the data, and like, and unleash the power of the crowd, and the creativity is amazing. And I think, certainly for me, coming back to LA and to California, and LA in particular, the creative energy here, so different, and it's something that we could totally take advantage of. And I guess the pro of the Chinese method is that it's very top down, and it's gonna get done, you know, so there's no way out of it. But the con is, like, how do you ensure that you're striking the right balance, that you're actually doing good government? How do you know that you don't go too far with that? And I think, you know, to your point about standards, I'm a big believer in restraints and maybe deadlines, because I'm an ultimate procrastinator. Providing a great avenue for innovation, right? Because if you are told to design something within a particular size and restraints, it really forces you to think. And how do you refine that design, et cetera, and really forces you to come up with the greater creative solutions. At least that was certainly my experience designing something as square as airplanes and satellites, but regardless. But let's open it up to the floor for questions. And ma'am, you had a question or a comment?
Yes, a comment. You mentioned China and the economy of scale, but I'm working on something else and read that in the Netherlands they are using toilet paper, recycling it, using the cellulose from bleaching it, cleaning it, using the cellulose from it, and to put it in the concrete because of the amount of rain, they need it to be porous and permeable, and then the cellulose of the toilet paper can be used that way. So they've already made bike paths out of it, and the research is going further into what else can we do with it because we produce so much now. In a closed loop, in a closed cycle, you're not just you're actually helping reduce energy at the wastewater treatment plant because this sludge is very chemically intensive and pressure and all that kind of stuff to get rid of it and landfills, and so it's really multi-benefit. And I don't know the population of the Netherlands, but I'm sure it's going to be Maine. Okay, so, but they moved it forward. Someone came up with an idea. They did a small pilot. It moved. So things seem to not move here. It just takes forever to and you hear about these other places that aren't just coming up with an idea, incubators, and it's happening. So that's a little where scale doesn't, it's not scale. I mean, you talked about the legislation, you talked about sometimes that top-down approach is necessary. I mean,
Like when you have small children? My house is not a democracy, I will tell you what. Sorry.
I need you in mind. So there must be a way. I mean, you mentioned the Trump, and you sighed. Like, I saw you had a huge sigh of disappointment, but not Trumpian, but something that's a little more I don't know, top-down approach at a certain level, to a certain extent, without affecting democracy, without affecting inclusivity of stakeholders and things like that. So.
Yeah, just to jump in, I think that's the balance, and this is what I like about the Xprize kind of concept, is the fact that you can still be in some sense in this environment, but the incentives are different, right? So the incentives for folks trying to figure out, let's say, transparent air monitoring that's connected and networked, where the citizens have a really good view of what their neighborhood looks like. That drives civic engagement. It drives city council, so you bubble up. But to get to that, privacy, a whole host of other issues. What can you measure? What can't you? You can do PM now, but you can't do methane. You can do methane maybe, but you can't do black carbon. All of these things are things to be solved, but it won't be solved, in my view, in the confines of the ARB or in the local air district. Everyone is trying to do their own thing in some decentralized way. If you go to Central Valley, they give folks backpacks. They go out, they put them, they measure. That's fine, but they're not necessarily networked. So it's difficult for the ARB to say what we should be doing from a resource perspective in that jurisdiction or area, because quite frankly, we're not connected. Things that would be, and you kind of look at the traffic situation. I always use Waze as an example, but if you think about it, there is a way, it is a value. It is like consumers drive that. It's like, I like Waze because I know where police are. It's kind of like somebody's sharing and crowdsourcing and saying, hey, by the way, be careful, both ways. But I think from an air monitoring perspective, I'm really interested in trying to figure out how to scale up that kind of innovation. Will someone take this on from a networking perspective? Will someone take it on from a big data perspective? Will somebody plug in all the local air districts and the statewide ARB so someone has a dashboard? Can we then take resources and allocate to those areas that historically have had patterns of very hard to solve air quality issues? All of those are super important, and until we have that innovation, an Xprize to me is still kind of solves something like that if people want to really tackle it, but the reward would have to be somewhat substantial.
Aslak, any thoughts or observations from your time? And
Yeah, just a comment, like in the Nordics, like the water is drinkable everywhere. It has to be. So anywhere you go, you can drink water from the faucet, and that's it. Why not for the air similar kind of, or like talking about organic air, kind of like having those kind of concepts that everybody will understand what does that mean. Maybe, I don't know, again, the measuring is the hard part and what is organic in that sense, but like trying to move it to the direction that everybody will understand. Like if water is drinkable, we understand it, we like it. If air is breathable, we like it, and just simple matters. Talk about organic, unorganic. I saw here in LA, like everybody's eating organic food, which is great, and they value that. So why not move to that direction?
They also judge you.
I haven't seen that. I've been just a few days here, so sorry.
Well, with that, I think we're just about out of time, so I'd like to very much thank my panelists. If you please join me in thanking them, and thank you all for your participation.